Jeff Baylor from the Census Bureau, thanks so much for being here this week.
It's a pleasure speaking with you.
We have a few weeks left for people to fill out the census. That's the good news. The bad news is that in New York, we have about a third of the state that has not filled out the census yet. Obviously, that's not where we want to be, but give me some context. How does this compare to what we saw in 2010 at about this time? I know the year's obviously very different, but let's compare it to a decade ago.
Yeah, we are a few percentage points behind as of right now. I think New York as a state ended up at 64.6% self-response rate at the end of the 2010 census. Also included in that percentage that hasn't responded are vacant homes, seasonal homes, second homes, which typically people don't think they need to respond to the census for their second homes, but they do. And we'll basically, when we knock on doors or talk to a neighbor, we'll find out that it's a second home and no one usually lives or stays there.
So do we know why less people are filling out the census this year? I don't think that we're far behind the 64% in self-response from a decade ago, but it seems to me, being in the middle of a pandemic, everybody's home, I figured the response rates would be up, not down. Do we know what's happening here?
Yeah, I can tell you from a national perspective, we're doing better than we thought we would going into the 2020 census. And that's before we knew anything about COVID. Kind of the tough news piece has been we have partners throughout the state of New York who are planning really cool events, in the hardest to count communities. And unfortunately, COVID hit New York at the time the census data collection was starting. And all of our partners, unfortunately, had to cancel these wonderful plans that they had put in place March through July to help people respond to the census.
So where are those hard to count areas? Where are we looking at? And I guess, does that correlate to where it's not being filled out currently? Where do you see the most difficult or the lowest response rates? And where is it hardest to get people to fill it out?
Yeah, and they do correlate with one another. Typically, the characteristics of communities that are hard to count, typically minority communities, communities where there may be a language barrier, communities of new immigrants. An additional challenge, especially for a lot of our cities and towns in upstate New York, when you look at colleges and those off-campus students, many of them left before they ever got their invitation in the mail. We need those college students to fill out the census as if they were still living at that off-campus apartment.
You mentioned immigrants, and a few years ago, I know the federal government had tried to ask about citizenship on the census. The Supreme Court essentially blocked that, said no, but there was a fear at the time that just having the proposal out there would drive some immigrants to choose not to fill out the census and not participate. Are we seeing that? Do we know? I don't know if there's a way for you to even tell, but are we seeing that immigrants aren't filling out the census forms at the rate that they would have 10 years ago?
Yeah, we certainly have heard from partners that that's a concern that they have of their community members, that people may be scared. And that's why our partners, our trusted voices, are so important in delivering the message to those communities to let them know it's safe. That first off, we don't ask citizenship status on the 2020 census, and the data we collect can never be shared with anyone at any time for any reason at the person or household level. So we can't share their individual data with anyone. Not local, state, or federal law enforcement agencies, not IRS or Homeland Security or ICE, not local housing authorities. So these trusted voices are sharing that message. And then the other piece of that message is really talking about what's at stake for their community for the next 10 years. When we talk about the hundreds of billions of dollars of federal funding for programs like food stamps and TANF and WIC and Medicare and Medicaid, to improving infrastructure in our communities, the roads, the bridges, the tunnels, the mass transit systems, parks, from education for our kids, from National School Lunch and Breakfast programs, supplies, classroom sizes, Pell Grants, Head Start, and finally, healthcare. I can't think of a more important reason to take the 5 minutes to complete your census, but then to support your local healthcare system, because the funding they receive for hospital beds, for supplies, for the number of hospitals in your community, for emergency service personnel, fire trucks and police departments, are all based upon formulas that use census data. So this is really our once-a-decade opportunity to ensure we get a complete and accurate count of everyone who's living in the United States.
All right, Jeff Baylor from the U.S. Census Bureau, the New York Regional Director. I hope we can get more people to fill out the census in the next couple of weeks. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for the conversation. I appreciate it.